everyone. Welcome. I'm Christy Narsi, National Chapter Director at Independent Women's Network. Welcome to Network reACTS. And today I'm really excited. I'm joined by Dr. Chloe Carmichael, a clinical psychologist, best-selling author, and fellow at Independent Women's Forum, and also my friend and chapter leader, Erica Ramirez. And she is the leader of the New Mexico Voices Las Cruces chapter. And we're here because we want to discuss some new things, including Dr. Chloe's book. So we're very excited. Thanks for being here, ladies.
Thank you for having me.
Great to be with you.
Yeah. And we're looking forward to actually hosting Dr. Chloe as our guest speaker at the New Mexico Voices Las Cruces chapter meeting next Tuesday. And I wanted to get our members to get kind of a sneak peek of the conversation that we're going to be having about Dr. Chloe's new book, Can I Say That? Why Free Speech Matters and How to Use It Fearlessly. Dr. Chloe's book explores the connection between open dialogue and emotional well-being, something that we don't think about, but it's so interesting. I'm so excited that you kind of made that, you made that connection and wrote a whole book about it. And so I'm going to start with you, Dr. Chloe. What led you to write this book?
Goodness, yeah, Christy, a million things led me to write this book. But so as a clinical psychologist, I noticed that there was a lot more talk coming from, quote, mental health professionals about the harms of hate speech and bullying. And you better not say this because it's phobic. But there wasn't any talk coming from my profession about the mental health benefits of authenticity, of speaking your mind. Even though it's really very basic psychology 101, that through language is how we develop good ideas and discard bad ideas. It's how we do emotional regulation. It's how we form social bonds. And we know that social bonds are really important to mental health. And so it was strange, but not strange. I kind of knew the reason why that my profession wasn't talking about it. For whatever reason, free speech is politically coded as a right issue. And my profession happens to, surveys within the profession show that we're about 90% liberal. So I had a feeling that it was just for whatever reason a political issue. And I thought I've got to break through this and just say the obvious, which is that speaking your mind is good for mental health. So that's the story in a nutshell.
I love that. And Erica, we're talking about New Mexico, your home state. This is where you are. And what are some of the barriers and challenges maybe that you've come across, or that maybe some of your chapter members have expressed to you when it comes to speaking out?
So as you know, Christy, New Mexicans are very authentic and we are very outspoken. That we don't have an issue with doing that. However, how can we be sincere without being rude? And that's something that we run into a lot here in New Mexico. We want to speak out of our character, not our attitude, which is really difficult, especially now. And we want to be direct without being ill-mannered. And it's not that we're uneducated. It's the fact that we're just so passionate about what we believe in, our traditions and our values, that we really stand up for them, regardless of what anyone feels. However, lately I've felt that, and my chapter members have felt that they've been like a hand over their mouth just so we don't offend anyone. And Dr. Chloe Carmichael is what we need. And we're looking so forward to her meet with us on Tuesday, because we really want to learn how to be, like I mentioned earlier, how to be sincere without being rude.
Yeah. And so listening to that a little bit, Dr. Chloe, what are common concerns that, I'm assuming these are common concerns that you address both in your practice and in your new book, where maybe those of us who, are more conservative are trying to look for ways to speak to those who are more liberal. And to Erica's point, we want to express what we believe because it's a core to us, right? It's a core value or a core belief, but we don't want to be rude. We don't want to be forceful type things. So what do you address in the book that will help that?
Right. Well, it's one thing to worry about being rude. It's a different thing to be worried about being mislabeled as rude. right? So in an area where, people like to say words are violence, you just simply saying, well, I don't think boys belong on the girls' soccer team, even if they put on a girl uniform, somebody can say, well, you're hateful and you're violent, right? And it's statistically true. I cover this in the book. It's called the 5 Ds that by their own report, people who are left leaning. So if you're going to be speaking out in disagreement with causes of the left, they are statistically more likely to defriend you on Facebook, to drop contact in real life, even with a family member, to distance in real life, to decline to date across the aisle, or to and they do this by their own self-report over political differences because, again, I come with compassion here. They believe that, you're Hitler or whatever. And so they think, well, of course I'm being virtuous. I'm refusing to associate with hateful people. So with that in mind, it can be tempting then, as Erica said, to just feel like, well, gee, I better just have a hand over my mouth. I better not talk because whatever I say, they're going to label me as rude. But the problem is that the less we talk, the more violent we actually become. So I can tell you again, as a psychologist, when you're dealing with violent offenders, the first thing you want to do is teach them to use their words, increase their emotional vocabulary. That's what mothers of toddlers also know, right? And it's not surprising to me as well then that we have this coincidence of the 5 Ds coming, from the left, and then the U.gov polls as showing that the left is 2 to 8 times more likely to endorse political violence, depending on actually increasingly being left increases their tendency to do that. So what do we do, right? How do we handle it? Good news. I've got techniques in the book for speaking up as well as for listening well, because both are important for dialogue. And so in a situation like that, what Erica's describing, if you want to speak up and you just know that it's going to be labeled as hateful, even if it's not, I think sometimes it's helpful to start by asking the other person to share. So you might start by saying, hey, look, I think you and I see this issue differently. I think we need to talk it through. And I'm happy to go first if you want me to, but I would also just like to give you the floor and invite you to share, your feelings about this and your feelings about people that tend to disagree with you and why. I want to hear you out. And then it's called reflective listening. You say, okay, I just want to repeat it back to you to make sure I really got what you said. You repeat it back in a reasonable tone of voice that shows, that you just hear them, that you see that they're a rational person. And then you say, okay, now, would you mind hearing what I have to say? And just to make sure we're not talking past each other, after I share my piece, would you recap it back to me just to make sure we agree with each other, because the stakes are high. If, there's talk of hatefulness, we want to make sure we understand each other. So would you be up to do that? Would you be up to hear me out and then recap it back like I did for you? And if the person says no, then I frankly think you probably dodged a bullet, not literally, figuratively, because why bother trying to engage with someone who's telling you from the outset, I refuse to have a civil conversation. But if they say yes, at least you're at a good starting point. And, I have more tips too, but I know we're on a short show, so I'll save some of it for the actual talk.
No, this is so great. I'm so interested in this. I just how the mind works, behavioral psychology, all of that is just so interesting to me. And I feel like it's a conversation we just don't have. We talk about how to message all the time, but then we don't talk about the emotional side of it or the behavioral side of it, things like that. Erica, anything come to mind as you're listening to Dr. Chloe that you feel like, man, maybe we'll ask her to dive into this when she visits, or just any thoughts that you've got?
So we are New Mexico Voices, and Christy remembers this. We named the chapter New Mexico Voices because that is who we are. Independent Women's Network graciously creates platforms all over the United States so that we common folk like myself can express our concerns and our feelings. And how can we do this, Dr. Carmichael? Like I mentioned earlier, and you said you have more tips for us, but how can we do this being having some empathy for others? Because we also have to agree that even though we're passionate about what we believe, the other person is passionate about what they believe as well. And
Mhm.
so we need to show that empathy. And that's hard. That's difficult for us New Mexicans. We really want you to help us this coming Tuesday,
Mhm.
so we can relate to others, not necessarily fall into what they do or they believe, but also just show that empathy towards them, not expressing that we want them off the face of the earth, even though
Yeah.
sometimes that comes across. Of course, we don't want that. So just how do we do that with empathy? That would be
Yeah.
the number one question.
Yeah. So, the exercise I just explained, which is called reflective listening, actually has a lot of empathy in it, because if we think of what empathy is, it's putting yourself in the other person's position. So when you literally repeat back to them what they said in a reasonable tone of voice, you're showing that you're literally trying to see things from their perspective and taking some time to make sure you did it. So that is one way to do it. Another way I think that can be helpful is to ask the person questions. So I think people are used to the idea that when there's a disagreement, everybody's going to be fighting for airtime and trying to be, what Dr. Phil calls right fighters, trying to like win the argument. And when you just stop and you ask someone questions, it can be helpful, or ask them if they had ever any experience of seeing the matter a different way. That can also help people to realize, that you're there to ask, questions. Again, I think also it can be helpful to remind people of your common goals. So again, like suppose that you are arguing about, you're at a school board meeting about, if boys should be on the girls' soccer team or whatever. Besides the fact that you could just obviously, like at this point, call the law, because thankfully, like it's a matter of Title IX at this point. But, just as an example, you can remind the people of your common goals. You can say, first of all, I just want to highlight the beauty of the fact that we're all here as concerned parents trying to come together and talk about what's going to be best for our kids, that we share that common goal. We may have different strategies on how we want to get there, but I just want to highlight that we are all on the same side in that one regard. And let's see if we can find some common ground within that.
Right.
That's so good.
Yes.
That's the starting place, is finding the common ground. That's really good. Dr. Chloe, what do you hope our members are going to take away from this book? What's the big takeaway?
Yeah, so free speech is good for mental health. And I want them to have a way, as Erica was actually saying, to very graciously and effectively answer back if somebody tries to shut you down because you're being, quote, hateful or bullying or whatever. Um, to be able to do it in a way that says, hey, look, you know what, I hear what you're saying, but I also know we all care about mental health. And did you know that, in fact, like speaking your mind, even if people disagree, is actually good for mental health? And when people don't dialogue, that's when, conflict actually festers and escalates. So our goal really should be to have dialogue, even if we, disagree. And then the other thing that I would want people to take away from it would be tools to know that they really should speak up, to have that courage, because it's easy to say, and I did this myself. I was telling Christy earlier, I lived in New York for 20 years, and I kind of I started to lapse into this habit of keeping things unsaid because I knew it was going to make waves. And I thought, well, what is this really hurting? I'm just going along here. And it wasn't until I moved to Florida and started speaking out more openly, it had to do with COVID masks for kids, that I started realizing speaking your mind is actually really important. My cognition sharpened. I started to feel more emotionally present. My social relationships deepened. I mean, what a surprise, right? By being myself and saying what I really thought, it touched off like, wow, this is actually obviously related to mental health. So I want people to see that there's a value in doing that, in really finding their voice, but as Erica said, doing it in a way that's, going to be as collaborative as possible.
I love it. I love it. I have so many more questions, but I know that we're kind of time's up here. So thank you so much for joining me, Erica, Dr. Chloe. Where can they find the book, actually? Let me ask you that. Where can they find the book?
Yeah, thanks so much. I would love if people would do that, if they would get the book, because the more pre-orders that we get, the more it shows retailers that this book matters. And then they stock it more. It's kind of a virtuous circle that way. So if they go to freespeechtoday.com, there'll be all kinds of, you can get it everywhere books are sold, but freespeechtoday.com is just the easiest way.
Perfect. freespeechtoday.com. I will be pre-ordering a book. I've read other books of Dr. Chloe's. Let me tell you, you will learn. So thank you, ladies, again. And to learn more about the chapters and our activity across the nation, go to iwnetwork.com. Thank you so much to our viewers for tuning into this episode, and we'll see you on the next Network Reacts.